First off, here's the full beat. So my first tip is about form, and form is the overall feeling of the beat over time. Is it just a single bar loop that just goes over and over, or does it have changes throughout it, and how often do those changes repeat? So in this particular example, I'm doing an A-B-A-C form, meaning we've got a bar, we've got a bar that is different, back to the first bar, and then a final one that is even different from all of those. So A, B, A, C. This gives the sensation that the drum beat is 4 bars long, not that it's a one bar pattern that just goes over and over, or even has 1 bar pattern with just tiny changes. The whole thing feels like before 4 bars come around, we haven't heard kind of the repetition of the pattern yet. So let's check that out. Here's the drums by themselves, and let's pay attention to the form. This is A, B, A, C. By the way, I have a couple of really in-depth videos on programming realistic drums, on sample selection and on pattern creation. I'll link them in the description if you want to check those out for more of this stuff. In this particular beat, what I'm doing is taking a simple kick pattern for the A section and a complex one, relatively speaking, for the B section. I should say strong beats and syncopated. And vice versa on the hi-hats, we've got syncopated and then strong beats, going back and forth, syncopated, strong beats. Here we got strong beats in the kick, syncopated. So take a listen to that interaction here. These hats and these kicks. So they kind of alternate back and forth. One's saying, I'm static and strong, and the other one's playing around, and now I'm static and strong, and I'm playing around. So with all that said, that's form. Let's move on. One of my favorite topics, ghost notes. So I'm using ghost notes constantly in everything I'm doing on the drums because they're sick and everybody loves them. So let's check it out. Now, if you don't know, a ghost note is generally on the drums considered to be a very light snare hit. So I've got a main snare, this thing, and I've got a secondary snare that's very light and soft that's used almost like a hi-hat to accent in between hi-hats or other percussion elements and create a kind of syncopated thing going on there. But you can also consider ghost notes on the hi-hat itself. So I've got a main hat, I've got an offbeat hat. My idea here is that this and this are kind of 2 halves of the same thing. They're just going t, 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 hard, soft, hard, soft. This one is always on the offbeat. This one, of course, does the syncopated thing, then does the strong beat thing. But in between, we've got these other little ones here, here, and these are kind of like ghost notes, you could say, on the hi-hat. So I'm alternating my ghost notes between hi-hat ghost notes and snare ghost notes. And the hi-hat and the ghost note snares define the top end of the beat, you could say. Their combination becomes a kind of single texture. So let's check that out. If I just mute all of the main snares and kicks, and we just listen to this. So you see these little guys here and these little guys here. They all interface with this main thing that's going on here to fill in gaps that are not being hit by anything else, but add to the groove. Add to the groove, meaning, as we're going to talk about with velocity here, pushing your body, essentially, into strong beats and then playing with that. So we're trying to push the body into strong beats so that your head starts bobbing. But then as soon as that's happening, we syncopate by not hitting on strong beats, basically. And that is a enjoyable experience where you go for a strong beat, but the hit comes after, right? Or before. That's the feeling we're going for here. And that's kind of what my intention is with these sorts of textures. So when writing a ghost note pattern, you just write your main pattern first. That means kick, snare, basic hi-hat pattern. Then you start looking at where can you put in these little tiny hits on the snare, very, very soft, almost imperceptible, or little tiny hits on the hi-hat, or both, to create the interesting kind of micro rhythms, let's say, in between the main beat. And you'll notice that when you do that, it really adds to the forward flow of the thing and the sense of complexity and reality to the beat. All that gets enhanced by adding in these ghost notes. So ghost notes is a huge thing. It's really worth your time to check it out. So now we're going to talk velocity. I'm a huge fan of having velocity changes in drums because of the reason I just mentioned about creating a pocket, essentially, for your head to fall into in a groove, but it has many other benefits too. And it's a massive topic and has a lot of subtlety and nuance to it. But suffice it to say, there's a big difference between a beat that is just static, heavy velocities the whole time and the same beat that has subtlety and variation in the velocity. So let's check out what we're doing here. First things first, the big hits, the main hits that hold down the groove don't have velocity changes. And that's a genre dependent thing. Because I'm working in this kind of whatever this is, electronic type of glitch hoppy, whatever kind of vibe, I need my main hits to always be solid, always be the same dependable, reward expectation. It never varies, or else it will kind of fall apart. It'll feel a bit weak because this genre and a lot of similar genres require that strength in the main groove elements. So I could have gone in and say dip some of these kicks down in velocity, like this would be a good one to do, but I will lose a bit of impact there, and that's important for this because I'm gonna have a chord hit on that or whatever, and I need that kick to be strong. Just for reference, here is the same beat exactly, but with all the velocities just squashed flat. They're still relatively, balanced against each other to some degree. They're not all fully maxed out, but within themselves, they are all completely flat. Sounds like this. So you notice in this one with the velocity, your whole body is pulled into the strong hits, where when the velocity is static, it just feels flat, like a wall of sounds that doesn't feel like I should be particularly falling into or paying attention to any part of the groove. So velocity is not a catch-all thing. We don't just go adding velocities to everything. We got to think about it. Where is it important to have velocity? So the first place here is in this secondary kick. I've got these big kicks, but I've got a secondary kick, which is just a light little doop. And the idea is bum, da-dum. And you'll notice that this velocity is very light compared to this one because, like I talked about, it's got forward momentum into the strong beat. You put the light stuff before the heavy beat, and the heavy beat is where you put the heavy stuff, of course. But that's the example I'm using in the kick here. It happens twice in this pattern. In the snare, it is static the whole time, but its ghost notes are very light velocity, and even then, they aren't static. There are variations in how heavy the ghost notes are, and that comes from how important is that division to accent to the groove. Meaning, some of these ghost notes are there just as kind of like an alternate hi-hat, let's say. A very subtle little thing, you can hardly even tell it's there. Whereas this one is meant to be heard. So let's play. Right? You want to hear that one. I want to hear that one. The rest of them are kind of there as filler, complexifiers, or just to make the beat more interesting somehow. But this one comes twice, and we've got this little roll here, and it is rolling up in velocity as well, going right into this hi-hat. The hi-hats have velocity, not the main hits. The main hits are always the same, but these secondary hits have a lot of changes. If I highlight these, you can see it fluctuates. It's not even regular, right? Everyone is different. I played them by hand, and I generally kept them the same unless I needed to change them. Just to get a more natural feel to it. These are just offbeat. They're not meant to be the strong, heavy hits. So their variation, being subtly different every time, gives a sensation that this was really played, basically, even though no one's going to be thinking that, oh, these drums are really played or not. It's not going through your head. But it adds to the sense of reality, to the sense of believability of the drum pattern overall, to have these micro variations wherever you can find them. When it's not on important hits, we're having micro velocity and micro timing variations whenever we can. So humanization is a big topic. Of course, DAWs come built in with humanization parameters for MIDI these days, because of course when we program stuff, if you're not playing it yourself, often it comes out super static, and perhaps that's a good thing depending on the genre, but in many genres not. Having a little bit of variation, like I said, adds to the believability and to the groove, to the interest. It's very valuable in many ways. So let's take a look at how I'm using it in this beat. Similar to velocity, the main hits in this type of groove are right on the beat. The 1 of the beat, the 3, the 2, and the 4 where the snares are, they are right on. Now that's not a always do this thing. That's a, for me in this genre thing, that's what I'm doing. So even though the strong beats are right on the grid, these other ones that are syncopated can be shifted, for me usually late. I have a huge pet peeve against stuff coming early, except for snares in certain circumstances. That's a topic for another day. But shifted late and not by the same amount, by different amounts each time you want to shift it. It's done by hand or it's played and then adjusted or whatever, to get a bit of a stylish, steezy kind of vibe going on, where stuff is just like, oh, I can't quite get there on time. I'll just get there a bit late, and it kind of feels good. But it doesn't feel good if it's the same every time. So it's a little bit different every time it happens. So that's the kicks. The snares are always on, but the claps, as you can see, they're different every time. They're a bit late sometimes. It's a bit early one time, and then it's late, then it's right on. So that kind of thing, that's big for me. When you've got a main snare and you've got something else, clap, snap, percussion, whatever it is, it's got to go somehow, right? You don't want too much like you hear in some hip hop or whatever, but you want some, and sometimes that should come after. What that does is it means that you get your main snare hit and then you hear the tail of the clap, and other times the clap comes a little bit ahead, so right, and you hear the coming together of the clap before the main snare hits, and the variation in it is what does the thing. So this can be done just by being played by hand after you've made the main beat, and then you decide like, okay, are some of these too far off and I have to go in and adjust them or whatever. That variation again adds to the believability and just adds to actually the kind of aesthetic pleasure of listening to it, because sometimes it lines up in just such a way that it feels like but you don't want that every time, because then it's not anymore. Now it's like, oh, okay, well that's just the sound, and I'm kind of bored of it. On the hats, I've got very subtle humanization going on, and when the hat is hitting by itself on a strong beat, it's right on because it's got to take the place of the kick. But when something else has got the beat, the strong beat, the snare or the kick or whatever, the hat can be off. It can be late, it can be early, right? To do exactly like the claps, have a kind of sound or kind of sound to it, right? So that's all that's happening there. It's the same thing with these hats. These offbeat hats are all delayed in this case. I shouldn't say that. This one's right on. These guys are delayed. These guys are delayed. Most of them are delayed because I'm trying to go a little bit, not too much, into the slug groove. What that is that every offbeat hi-hat is shifted late a little bit. Not so late as to be swung, like a triplet thing, but just a little bit, like that. And here it's just a tiny little bit, but it adds to the wonk of the groove, right? That's the vibe I'm going for. Now, just for fun, I took the same beat and just threw it into a humanization algorithm and just said go. So here's the result of that. The issue there is that when a real person plays a beat, it's not all perfect, but it's not random. It's informed by the feeling, by the mindset, by the groove, by the experience. It's not actually just randomly spread between some particular threshold, saying here to here and let's just go anywhere in between. That results in what we have here, which just feels badly played. There's a few moments where it feels like, oh, that's kind of sweet, but then the rest is like, oh, kind of, actually it's not really played very well. So you can't just take a thing and just click humanize and be like, yep, that's probably how a drummer would have played it. A drummer wouldn't play it like that. A drummer does play it not perfectly, but not randomly. And so that's why you need to go in and manipulate by hand, hand-done quantization, not just quantize and humanize. Either play it by hand and go manipulate yourself, or quantize and manipulate yourself afterwards. At least that works really well for me. This last tip is about adding one distinctive, special element to your beat. And it doesn't happen all the time. It only happens every so often. I think there's a tendency in a lot of us when we pick our sounds, and even tonal sounds like notes and things, chords and melodies and such, to be like, well, I need to use it through the length of the beat because it's there and it may as well play something. But you don't, of course. A sound can just appear just once and then it has real meaning, right? So in this beat, I used the cowbell sound. Let's check it out. So here in bar 2, we've got the cowbell, don't, don't. It only happens at that moment, and the sound is very distinct from every other sound we're hearing. All the other sounds are kind of blended together in the mix of hi-hats and snares and clicks and whatnot, but this cowbell sound is tonal. It has a pitch to it, right? A donk, donk. So let's check it out. And that's the only spot it happens. It just needs to be that little syncopated hit right there. And that does it enough. This one unique special element that is a little icing on top of your beat. You just find an interesting division somewhere, 1 or 2, maybe 3 interesting divisions nearby, and they just go there and they go nowhere else. That gives this thing just a little bit of, I don't know what, reality again, a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of life, a little bit of something that's good. If you're interested in the mixing regarding this beat or any portion of it, please just leave me a comment. I'd be happy to make another video on this stuff if it's of interest to people. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, please leave it a like and join the Discord community, Sonic Sorcery. There's a link in the description of this video or in the comments. If you want to check that out, it's just a community of producers and composers and musicians, supportive, helping each other out, talking about gear, plugins, getting feedback on your work in progress, whatever. Happy to have you there, so check it out in the description. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.